The rise of Tommy Robinson is a backlash towards the tamping down of our national instincts, and it's very regrettable. And what I'm calling for in my book is to try to look back and think if we can revive the old Britain, the way that we were comfortable with ourselves, and flying our flag was a natural good thing to do and wasn't fraught with these politics. It was a weird feeling. The book came out on the very day of the attacks, and last time my other book, Israelophobia, which I came into your show to discuss in 2023, came out on September the 7th, exactly a month before. So it's quite an eerie feeling. And my reaction, of course, is like everybody else in the Jewish community and further afield, of shock, but not entire surprise, of fear, but also of anger. There's a real sense that this attack came out of a wave of anti-Semitism that's been allowed to fester under this government, and even encouraged, I would say, by moves like recognizing a Palestinian state. Hamas were celebrating British policy at that time, and the chances are they're celebrating this latest attack as well, while the Prime Minister laments it. So there's a real sense of resentment, which we saw with the Jewish community lambasting and heckling David Lammy when he had the gall to show up and try to offer his condolences. A lot of anger, I think, towards the culture that has allowed, and the government that has allowed this to become the norm these days.
There are two themes that emerged from your book, which I've just read, and let's deal with each in turn. And one is in particular quite controversial, but the first theme is the West has stopped believing in itself. That's what I took from reading your book. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that if you think back to after the war, the pledge of never again was undertaken by the entire civilized world. And the way in which we began to interpret that was to tamp down anything that we believed that fascism could emerge from. And that included national pride, a belief in borders, a respect and pride in our history, in our flag. All of these things were seen as the roots of jingoism and nationalism and chauvinism and eventually fascism. And that became entrenched, in the Western, particularly the Western elites, where we got to a point over the decades where expressing any kind of affection for the flag or patriotism, pride in our history and our culture, a wish for our borders to be secure, was derided as fascist, as Nazi. We saw that with the Brexit vote, some of the rhetoric surrounding that period. And I think that those instincts were driven underground. And what it meant was that we were deprived of our healthy ability to express our natural patriotism and love of country, love of family, love of community in a way that we had always done and in which other countries continue to do. And that left a void or a vacancy which was filled by radicals. You had Islamist radicals with a very strong sense of self and identity inserting themselves into our national debate and trying to suck up the oxygen as much as they can, while everybody else stood back, not daring to criticise them because that would be derided as racist. And you had, of course, progressive radicals doing this, a similar kind of thing, undermining our national selfhood, demanding that we pay reparations, that we see ourselves as white supremacists, as structurally racist. And this produced some quite unpleasant results, the denigration of national selfhood, the rise of radicalism, and of course, where those two radicalisms overlap in the Venn diagram is with anti-Semitism, and that goes a long way towards explaining the hatred of Jews that is so endemic in the country today.
But the other theme in your book, I'll put it very bluntly so that you can respond back bluntly, is you're against immigration, but what you're really against is Muslim immigration. You don't believe that Muslims can be integrated into British society. Is that fair?
I have no idea how you could manage to draw that conclusion from my book. It's quite the opposite. I would suggest that you read the extensive chapter on Islam again. It begins with a statement saying that anti-Semitism is not inherent to Islam. I go through the history of Jews and Muslims, Jews living often very peaceably in Muslim lands, contributing towards Muslim success over the centuries. And I conclude that although anti-Semitism is not Muslims are not condemned to anti-Semitism, it isn't inherent within Islam. There is a place for Islam, for Muslims and Jews to live side by side, as is shown in Israel and can be replicated here too. There is a problem that we need not to shy away from. That problem is extremism in Muslim communities. And that extremism is exemplified by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the organization from which all jihadi groups have stemmed. Hamas, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, even the Iranian theocratic regime was influenced heavily by the Muslim Brotherhood. That's been banned by many Arab countries, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, and elsewhere. Its centre of operations is now in the West, particularly in Britain, and it holds Muslim communities often in a vice-like grip. It commands many of the mosques, it runs many of the community centres, and it metes out retribution against anybody who dares to assimilate or express a pro-Western or pro-Israel point of view in the Muslim world, in the Muslim communities in Britain. So my prescription is to ban the extremists and embrace moderate Muslims, freeing them to express pro-Western views which they may hold. I also point out in my book that many Muslims fought and died for Britain in both of our world wars, so there's no reason why they cannot live flourishing lives as Britons here. I'm surprised that you took the opposite view.
And can you let's go back a bit. You mentioned in passing Brexit, and I didn't want to pick you up on it because I'm in danger myself of disappearing down a rabbit hole when we talk about Brexit. But isn't there a sort of paradox at the heart of your argument? I would argue that Brexit has kind of fueled a sort of English nationalism, which has allowed people like sort of Tommy Robinson to flourish. And aren't you in danger, perhaps, in it's a perfectly respectable view, of course, to say that we should, not lose sight of the importance of the nation state, the importance of community, the importance of being patriotic and adhering to a flag and customs. And you cite many authors who talk about what it is to be, British, as it were. And that goes back to your thesis about, what are we for? Up with us, as you put it, rather than down with us. But, you have the extraordinary sight now of this Israeli minister, Amichai Chiki, now inviting, on the back of this grotesque attack in Manchester, inviting Tommy Robinson to Israel. Surely that can't be encouraged.
Yes, that's lamentable, and I think it's all part of the same phenomenon. I mentioned the two, in my book I talk about the three tribes of the new radicalism, which has filled the void left by the centrist fundamentalists who have tamped down our natural expressions of pride and patriotism. And those three tribes are Islamist fundamentalists, progressive radicals, and of course the nationalist chauvinists or the white supremacists, who are much more prevalent in America and in Europe than here, but we do have our own versions of them. And I think that this is part of what I call the funhouse mirror effect, where we've been unable to fly our flag in a healthy, normal way. And we've almost forgotten what that means to live in a society that is proud of its anthem and its flag, but is modestly proud, is not chauvinist, is just natural about it. And I think that the backlash that is creating is being fueled by radicalism. The only people who are willing to fly the flag, until the Labour conference, by the way, the other day, the only people willing to fly the flag in such numbers and with such open pride were chauvinists. And I think that when you think back to the Tommy Robinson march just a couple of weeks ago, it was good that we saw so many flags. A lot of the people there were good people, but a lot of the rhetoric coming from the stage was not good, was not unifying. There was no compassion towards Muslims who are part of this country, deservedly so. There was no compassion to, the sort of Christianity was a crusader Christianity, not a good Samaritan type of Christianity. It felt like a funhouse mirror of how we used to be. And I think that the rise of Tommy Robinson is a backlash towards the tamping down of our national instincts, and it's very regrettable. And what I'm calling for in my book is to try to look back and think if we can revive the old Britain, the way that we were comfortable with ourselves and flying our flag was a natural good thing to do and wasn't fraught with these politics.
I mean, I have a huge amount of sympathy with a lot of your arguments, and I do absolutely understand the argument about extremism and fundamentalism. And one does see it day to day sometimes, people who don't kind of accept our liberal values and our culture behaving in ways that I view as unacceptable. And I do think we should have a more muscular liberalism. But I want to pick you up on that last point, which is the danger, I think, of your argument and people who argue similarly is a sort of misplaced nostalgia. I mean, I was struck by one particular passage. It sort of leapt out at me, where you were sort of lamenting the fact that cathedrals had art installations. Now, I was thinking to myself, well, in medieval times, the cathedrals were barns. People kept their livestock in cathedrals. There's nothing wrong with having art in cathedrals. It doesn't undermine. But I guess what I'm saying is perhaps you're being too muscular in reaction to what you see as the failure of the nation state.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, the charge of nostalgia is one that I'm aware of hanging on the fringes of my argument. What I'm asking for, really, or arguing for, is for the baby to come back, not the bathwater. There are reasons why we got rid of a lot of bathwater over the last decades. No one wants to go back to the 1950s, but we've lost the baby. And I think that the case of religion is a very good one. My local cathedral, Winchester, recently had a whale song sound bath in it. I've seen a big glowing orb in Salisbury Cathedral, I think it was. There's been helter-skelters in the nave of other cathedrals and so on and so forth. And what I'm saying is this is a lack of confidence in the Church of England, by which it tries to attract secular people by making the church and the cathedral a secular space. And the problem is that people who are thirsting for something spiritual, something numinous, when they go to a cathedral and don't see it there, they will go elsewhere. And hence we see the uptake in church attendance really being directed towards the Catholic Church and other non-establishment denominations who have something to offer, whereas the church, the mainstream established Church of England, seems to have diluted itself to become almost the Liberal Democrats in a nice environment with lots of whale song sound baths going on.